Hey everyone, how's it going? So it's my honor to introduce one of my good friends, someone who entered Congress in 2010 in that election with me, someone who cares deeply about liberty, someone who has renewed all of our hopes in the American dream. You know, the American dream is something that each of us experiences in a different way. When I was a young boy, I often heard from my dad, who was a refugee, about the promise of America, about the opportunity we had here, that no matter what background you came from, no matter what your religious background, your ethnic background, no matter what your last name was, or who you were connected to, you had the opportunity to succeed in this country. And my mom, who is a Syrian Christian, she grew up under a autocratic regime. And she would tell us about the struggles in that country, how when they were just on the phone, they wouldn't know if the government was listening to them. The government put fear in the people, so they couldn't trust their neighbors. They couldn't trust the people that they interacted with on a daily basis. And some of the things that we're seeing going on in this country make us worried that we're headed in that direction, that we're headed in a direction where we have to fear our government, where the American dream is slipping away. And we have in Rand Paul a person who cares deeply about our personal freedom and our economic freedom. He stood on the Senate floor fighting for our rights, fighting for our privacy. He's introduced a budget that balances. He's introduced tax reform that will actually slash the tax code, make it simple for everyone to deal with. And he's a person who cares deeply about the Constitution. He's been called the most interesting man in American politics. And so it's an honor today to welcome to Mackinac, to welcome to Michigan, a man who's been here many times, been to Detroit, stood up for our liberty, Dr. Rand Paul.
Thank you. Thank you. Thank you. Thank you. Now, this is not my first political dinner. I've been to a few. It seems like I get in the car and I go to a dinner, and then I get in the car again, and then I go to another dinner. So I spend most of my day eating. But I was at a barbecue in Paducah about a month ago, and there was a guy in front of me, and he had loaded up 2 plates of barbecue. I was like, "You're not going to live very long eating like that." And he said, "Well, my granddad lived to be 105. And I said, "Your granddad didn't live to be 105 eating like that." And he said, "No, he lived to be 105 by minding his own business." Sometimes I wish we had a government that was actually minding its own business. I don't need government to collect my phone records. I don't need them to collect my phone records. I don't need them to collect my credit card statement. I don't need them to be involved in every nook and cranny of my business. And frankly, I want a smaller government. And that's one of the questions I think we have to ask. As we're trying to choose a nominee, we're trying to choose who can best beat the Democrats, but we also want somebody who won't preserve the status quo, somebody who would actually make government smaller. You see, there's a relationship. The smaller your government, the bigger your freedom. The bigger your government, the less freedom you have. It's exactly how it works. And so we get all excited, and people in this room have knocked on doors and delivered and given money and delivered literature. But I think sometimes we're disappointed. I know I am. I was elected in the wave in 2010 when Justin came in. It was a wave of folks who really wanted to take their country back. It's what I said in my election speech. I'm trying to make a difference. Justin really is a leader in the House making a difference. But we're up against great obstacles. You say, well, why don't you make it better? You're in charge. And I ask the same question. We're in charge in the House. We're in charge in the Senate. Why don't we make it any better? And what we're told, and the excuse that you're told every day is, well, we don't have enough votes. We can't get to 60 to defund Planned Parenthood because we'd have to get 6 Democrats. Well, you know what? I think we've got it completely upside down. Why don't we make the other side get to 60 to fund Planned Parenthood? You see, government's going to expire. The spending has a certain limit to it, and it expires. To start up any program, to get government rebooted in any fashion, you have to pass something. So I say we pass legislation, or we put it forward with all of the appropriation bills divided into the 12 departments of government, and let's try to pass affirmatively what we want. We could take every regulation Obama has passed, and we could say no funding will be allowed for this. Every one of them. And there's no excuse for not doing it. Because the thing is that government doesn't go on. Government ends on September 30th, and we need to renew government. Well, I was thinking maybe some of the things we shouldn't renew. You've all seen the movies on Planned Parenthood, but I could go through 1,000 items that shouldn't be renewed. I'll give you a couple of examples. Last year we spent $800,000 developing a televised cricket league for Afghanistan. You know how many people have televisions in Afghanistan? 1 in 10,000 people have a television in Afghanistan, and I don't care if they all had TVs. We don't have enough money to be spending $800,000 on a televised cricket league. In fact, if you want to think about it, we actually borrow the money from China to send it to Afghanistan. We spent $250,000 just recently bringing 24 kids from Pakistan to go to space camp in Alabama. We don't have that kind of money. If you want to bring kids from Pakistan to space camp, give your own money. We don't have money to be doing this stuff. I'll give you one more. We spent $300,000 last year studying whether or not Japanese quail, when they're on cocaine, are they more sexually promiscuous? I'm guessing we could have polled the audience on that one, all right? We have 48 federal agencies that have SWAT teams. And if you ever watch, I think this was the Washington Post, and I stand corrected if it's somewhere else, but they were doing the political check when I said there were 48 federal agencies with SWAT teams. And so you know what they said? They said, oh, well, no, they have automatic weapons, helmets, and gear, but they are not SWAT teams. The truth is, there are 48 agencies. The IRS has a SWAT team. Fish and Wildlife has a SWAT team. Department of Agriculture has one. The Department of Education has one. A couple years ago, they arrested an Amish farmer in Pennsylvania, and what was his crime? Selling milk from the cow. I mean, you think your government's too big when you have a SWAT team arresting people for selling milk from the cow. EPA's got a SWAT team. What are they busily doing in Wyoming right now? In Fort Bridger, Wyoming, Andy Johnson built a cattle pond. He got the local permit he needed to dam up the creek. The EPA is fining him $37,000 a day, and he's a good Western guy from Wyoming. He's not paying. His fines are at $20 million right now. We've got to stand up and fight. I'm going to be at a rally later on in Kentucky this month, and we're calling it the Rally to Resist. Now, I'm not saying we don't obey the law, but I'm saying we stand up. Your governors and your attorney generals, we should stand up and fight the federal government. Take them to court. John and Judy Dollarite live in a small town in Missouri, and they wanted to teach their son about, how to run a small business, how to work and earn money. So they bought him some rabbits, and the rabbits turned into more rabbits, and before you know, he had a successful business. And then the USDA came. Now, he did have a permit, but it's always like everything else. He had the wrong permit, according to the federal government. The local ag agent said, this is what you have to get, and the federal government said something else. So the federal government, in their infinite wisdom, decided to start fining him. When they went to court, he owed $91,000. As a 14-year-old kid, and I'm not kidding you. So, but the government, they said, oh, well, we have every consideration for making it easy on you. You can pay by cash or credit card. But if you don't pay, within 30 days, the fines will total $3.1 million for not having the right permit. Our government is literally out of control. And you say, well, we elected Republicans. Why is it not any better? I'll tell you why it's not any better. Because we don't have people who will stand up and say, enough's enough. We lurch from deadline to deadline. You'll hear about it in a couple days. Another deadline, government's going to shut down. Well, what the hell have they been doing for a year? There are 12 departments of government. 12 departments of government, each individual appropriation bill, not one has been passed. And our side says, well, the Democrats won't vote for them. Put them on the floor, make them vote, and you know what? If they don't get 60 votes, maybe we need to pause for a while and reconsider what we're spending the money on. I mean, it's insane. I'll give you another example. I was in the Foreign Relations Committee. This is probably 6 months ago. And it annoys, can I say it annoys the hell out of me? Yeah, it annoys the hell out of me that we spend so much money overseas for people who hate us. And I'm like, can't we just agree not to give money to countries that hate us? So I introduced an amendment in the Foreign Relations Committee, and my amendment said that we shouldn't give any money to countries that persecute Christians. And you say, well, how would you define persecution of Christians? Well, it's pretty easy. What I said is any country that has a law in the books that says if you criticize the state religion, you'll get the death penalty or life imprisonment. That's pretty harsh. If you criticize the state religion, death penalty or life in prison. How many countries have that law? Probably 25, 30. How many of them get money from us? Most of them. Some of them, like in Afghanistan, we won the war for them. We presided over their constitution with the moderates, and they still have death penalty for criticism of the state religion. They have death penalty for conversion. If you're part of the state religion and you convert to a non-state religion, which essentially means from Islam to Christianity, death penalty. But we continue to give them money. Pakistan, we've given them billions of dollars. There's a woman in Pakistan by the name of Asia Bibi. She's a Christian. There aren't many Christians left in Pakistan. It's probably less than 1%. She went to draw water from the well. And as she was drawing water from the well, the Muslim women of the village came up and began beating her with sticks and stoning her. She falls to the ground. She's crying out for help, and they're chanting, "Death, death to the Christian." As she's on her knees and bleeding, crying for help, finally the police come up, and who do they arrest? Her. Because the local women in the village said that she was criticizing the state religion. So in our country, we don't have that. You call that gossip. You don't go to jail for someone gossiping and saying that someone said something about the religion. She's still on death row. You know what? If I were president, I wouldn't give them a penny more till she's free. So in the Foreign Relations Committee, I put forward a bill, or an amendment to a bill. They get kind of annoyed with me a little bit. So I put forward an amendment, and I said, no money to any country that has a law in the book persecuting Christians, as I defined. You know what the vote was? 18-2 to continue spending your money wherever without restriction. But I've asked people, I've been around the country. I haven't met anyone. I have not met one Republican. We could make you all file through here. Maybe somebody might be for it. But the vast majority of you are not for this. So why does it happen? Because you leave your people in Washington too long. We should term limit them all, fumigate the place, and bring them home. $18-2 to continue doing this. And you know what they'll tell you? They'll tell you, oh, we're giving the money to the moderates. We're going to improve their behavior. And I say, well, you've been giving them money for 50 years. Have they gotten any better? Has their behavior changed? And then others of them will say, we're projecting power. We're projecting American might around the world. And I say, well, I don't think you look very powerful from bankruptcy court. You know, we got to borrow the money from China to send it somewhere else. We don't have any money. We shouldn't be sending money to countries that hate us, the countries that persecute Christians. We ought to first do no harm. We ought to think about what we're doing. They say we're giving it to the moderates. We had this same debate in the war in Syria. In 2013, sort of before ISIS came, but there were the beginnings of ISIS over there. We had this debate of whether we should send arms to the Islamic rebels in Syria. And I raised my hand and I said, well, isn't Al-Qaeda part of the Islamic rebels? And they said, yes, it is inevitable. And this was from our ambassador. It is inevitable that our arms will fight alongside Al-Qaeda. And I said, really? I thought that's who attacked us on 9/11. Why in the world would we want to fund people who are fighting in the same trench as Al-Qaeda? And al-Nusra, which is just another name for Al-Qaeda, and all of them, more radical ones, became ISIS. So we're giving money and weapons to the same side as ISIS. And if you hear people, and you'll hear people all in the presidential debate, because I'm the only one saying this, everybody else in the debate says, the only problem is we didn't give them enough arms. Even David Petraeus, and everybody says he's a great military genius, and maybe he is, he wants to give arms to the allies of Al-Qaeda. It's a stupid and foolish idea to be in league with Al-Qaeda. People say, well, what are we going to do about ISIS? Maybe we should start by not arming them. ISIS rides around in $1 billion worth of our Humvees. They pay their soldiers with $1 billion of cash left behind. They have anti-tank weapons that we gave to another group in Syria. And when they gave those weapons, I said, do you think any of these so-called moderate groups would recognize Israel? They're like, are you crazy? None of these groups, they don't like us, they don't like Israel. In fact, one of them said when they were done killing Assad, they were going to take the Golan Heights back, they were going to attack Israel. These are the people you're giving your weapons to. It's crazy and foolish. Sometimes in war, there's no good side and we might not want to participate. This is an important question. The people that are running for office, almost every one of them, I guarantee you, would get us involved in Yemen. Why? They say, well, Iran's in Yemen and we have to stop them. Well, who else is in Yemen? Al-Qaeda. So Iranian-backed rebels are killing Al-Qaeda. Maybe we should buy popcorn. They say, well, we have to support our ally Saudi Arabia. And I say, you mean the ones who came over and attacked us on 9/11? They say, oh no, the good Saudi Arabians. Oh, you mean the ones that are funding radical Islam all around the globe, including in our country. I think there's a school right outside of D.C. funded by Saudi Arabia teaching hatred of America in our own country. These are our allies? People say we need to accept a whole bunch of new refugees from the Middle East. What about Saudi Arabia? They're taking 0. What about Qatar? 0. What about Bahrain? 0. There was a good description, an op-ed not too long ago, and they said, the war is going on in the Middle East. Saudi Arabia and Iran are basically arsonists. And that's a good way of putting it. By throwing arms in on both sides, Saudi Arabia on one side and Iran on the other, basically we're just throwing gasoline on a fire. And then some have said, including your previous speaker tonight, has said we should not talk to Putin. It's like, really? Does anybody remember Ronald Reagan? Ronald Reagan did talk to Gorbachev. Ronald Reagan kept lines of communication open even though it was the most dangerous threat we had ever faced. Here's the thing. Is Russia a problem? Yes. Is it terrible what they did in the Ukraine? Yes. But you know what? They do have some influence in Syria. They're flying weapons in there. Now, what will some say? We have to get more involved to stop the Russians now in Syria. Well, they're giving them to Assad, who's going to be killing ISIS. Is Assad a good guy? No. If you're walking down the street, I wouldn't feed him. So I wouldn't give him weapons either, but think about what's going on in Syria. There are 2 million Christians in Syria, more Christians in Syria than any other place in the Middle East except for Egypt. They're caught in the crossfire. But if you ask Christians, line them up by the thousands and ask them, who would you rather have, Assad or ISIS? Every one of them, 100% will pick Assad. And yet we're trying to topple Assad. We're trying to topple Assad, and what would happen? Remember, the president wanted to bomb Assad. There are still people in our party that want to bomb Assad. And what would have happened? Had we bombed and dislodged Assad, ISIS would be in Damascus now. ISIS would be in control of all of Syria. What I'm trying to inject, and I am a solitary voice on the stage running for president, trying to inject some common sense into our foreign policy. And people say, well, is that really what we are? Is that conservative? It's exactly what Ronald Reagan was. Ronald Reagan was a peace through strength conservative. You didn't see him all over the globe. You did see him stand up to communism. He understood the evils of communism on a very personal level. You saw him increase the strength of our defense, but you did not see him involved in every war around the planet. He was actually much more complicated than many give him credit for. He negotiated and talked with Gorbachev. In fact, some of the same neoconservatives that now are critical of what I have to say, they hated Ronald Reagan at the time. People have forgotten that. We have to decide what is in America's interest. And you say, how do we know what's in America's interest? How do we know what is a vital national interest? Our founding fathers knew that it wasn't easy. We might not all agree here. Some of you might want to go back into Iraq now, some might not. The way you figured out what is in our national interest, you debate it. And so our founding fathers, with very distinct measure, wrote into the Constitution that the president does not unilaterally take us to war. Congress does. And you've seen how we bicker and fight and it's hard to come to a conclusion. Occasionally we come to almost a unanimous conclusion. After 9/11, I bet you there's not one person in here, myself included, who thought we shouldn't do something to respond to those who attacked us. When the vote came in Congress, it was unanimous. It might have been one vote against it, nearly unanimous. So when we go to war, when we're attacked, I think we can be united. But if you allow the president to do it without the authority of Congress, which is what's going on now, it happened in Libya, and now it's happening in Syria and Iraq. If you allow it to happen without the permission of Congress, it's not what the Constitution intended. In fact, Madison said that the executive branch is most prone to war. Therefore, we have, with studied care, vested that power in the legislature. These are the checks and balances. When people ask me, what's the worst thing the president has done? I say, how long do you have? But really, if I had to sum them all up, it wouldn't be Obamacare, it wouldn't be Dodd-Frank, it would be the collapse of the separation of powers. That includes the war power, it includes the regulatory power. The checks and balances were the incredible ingredient of the Constitution. Madison said we would pit ambition against ambition. The checks and balances would be Congress trying to maintain their power and the president trying to gain power, and they would work back and forth and they would check each other. But there's been a collapse of the separation of powers. Largely this president, but it's happened under Republicans too. It's been going on for 100 years or so. We've gradually let the president get too much power. The most important laws, the most onerous regulations, the things destroying our economy are not passed by Congress largely. They're done by the executive branch. Unelected bureaucrats are writing the laws now. We have to put a stop to it, but it's going to take an assertive Congress. And if they won't be assertive, even if they're Republican, you're going to have to replace them. You're going to have to get stronger congressmen who will stand up and say, enough's enough. It's going to take a majority in the House and 60 votes in the Senate to fund anything. Otherwise, it's going to have to shut down. When people ask me about the scandals under this administration, I sort of think of the old nursery rhyme, here a scandal, there a scandal, everywhere a scandal. They looked at the records of reporters, they targeted religious groups, they targeted religious businesses, they went after Tea Party groups. But when I think of all the scandals, the one that bothers me most is Benghazi. And it has nothing to do with the talking points. It has nothing to do with the movie. The point we've missed and we haven't discussed enough is it has to do with the 9 months preceding the attack and them begging and pleading for security, and at every turn, Hillary Clinton turning them down. This went on for 9 months, and it's a disgrace. In February and March of the year before the ambassadors killed in September, there were 6-man security teams, special forces. Let go in February, 6 more in March. As they're sending them home, the people in Benghazi are pleading for an airplane so they can fly around the country in case of an attack. Denied. You know what happened during the attack? There was no plane to fly from Tripoli to Benghazi. You know what we were doing? We were begging the Libyans to use their plane. Who made their plane? Of course, us. It's a C-130, but we probably bought it for them. It sits on their tarmac, and we had to beg to use it because we didn't even have a plane. It's a disgrace, and it was all at the hands of Hillary Clinton. As the spring went on, there were more requests and more denials. Right after they denied the plane, though, Hillary Clinton did approve $100,000 for an electrical charging station for the embassy in Vienna. It seems that they had purchased a bunch of Chevy Volts, which you also paid for and subsidized, but they didn't have the right plugs. They had to order $100,000 for a special plug to show how green we are, and at the same time, they didn't have money for a plane to fly around in Libya. Seems like a little bit of a mix-up on priorities, if you ask me. All summer long before the ambassador is killed, money's just flowing out of the State Department. They spent $650,000 on Facebook ads. Facebook ads. Seems they didn't have enough friends at the State Department. They spent $700,000 on landscaping for the Brussels embassy. They spent $5 million on crystal barware. All the while turning down security for Benghazi. It gets to August, a month before the assassination. Colonel Wood, you remember the name, he was there with a 16-man personnel team. They're getting threat. The assessment is we could be overrun. They're sending cables back to Hillary Clinton. She pulls out the last 16-man force. You know who was protecting the ambassador when he was killed? Some militia, some local militia that ran immediately and may well have been complicit with the attackers. You think Hillary Clinton goes anywhere around the world and a militia protects her? It's inexcusable. It's absolutely inexcusable. So in the middle of August, about a month before, now the ambassador's sending cable after cable back to Hillary Clinton. So when she finally came before our committee after he was assassinated for the review board, I asked her this question. I said, Secretary, Madam Secretary, did you read the cables? Did you read the cables pleading for help? And she kind of acted put off and haughty, like she was too busy to have done that. And like it was somebody else's job to have been reading these cables. And you know what I think? I think by her not providing an adequate defense, by her not stepping up, by her dereliction of duty, she should forever be precluded from holding our office. And if the country's going to consider her, you can say, was that a one-off? Was that just one time she didn't have good judgment? No, it's time and time again, this whole email thing. It isn't about necessarily a specific email or the specific content. It's about the lack of judgment. My goodness, to put sensitive information, if not classified, now it looks like it was classified, to put it on her own server. Why? Because the Clintons are up to so many damn shenanigans, they want to keep them private. I mean, have you seen Schweitzer's book? Think about it. Hillary Clinton had to approve the sale of a uranium company to the Russians. Why we would be selling a uranium company that mines in North America to the Russians, I don't know. But while it was being approved, Bill just happened to be giving a speech to the bank that was brokering the deal that Hillary Clinton approved. It just so happens that those who owned the uranium company gave $120 million to the Clinton Foundation. Coincidence? I have never seen anybody so abuse their public office to enrich themselves. I can't imagine that we can even consider her. I think the Democrats are starting to have second thoughts about her. How are we going to beat them, though? How are we going to win? How are we going to win Michigan? Y'all do great in the off years. You've got the state legislature, you've got the governor's mansion. You do many things right here. But the one thing we're not getting is we're not winning the presidential years. We got to figure out how to win the presidential years. And it's easier said than done. But I think what we have to figure out, and this is the big debate in the party. Many in the party say, well, we just need to dilute what we stand for. We need to become Democrat-light, offer the people who want government largesse, offer them maybe just a little bit less than the Democrats do, but offer them free stuff. I couldn't disagree more. We need to be more boldly for what we are for. We need to be the party. But the thing is there's a large part of what we are for that can bring new people into the party. I've been to Detroit several times. I was in Highland Park about a month ago. I've been to the south side of Chicago. I've been to Baltimore. I've been to Ferguson. I've been to Philadelphia with the same message. Why don't we leave more money in the cities and not take it in the first place? My tax plan would leave over $1 billion in Detroit over 10 years. It would leave over $3 billion in Chicago. That's consistent with who we are, sending less money to Washington. But what we do is we take that in a targeted way, specifically to people who haven't been listening to us, and say, how's it working out with the Democrats? How's it working out with those poverty programs that have been going on since the 1960s? How's the unemployment? African American unemployment in Baltimore, males aged 20 to 25, is 37%. It's worse than the Great Depression. There are people who are perking up and are ready to hear our message if we're ready to show up. We don't have to give up on what we stand for. In fact, we have to be more boldly for what we stand for. Why? Because in Washington, I'll tell you, not one prominent Republican, and I defy you to look this up, not one prominent Republican's for cutting taxes. You know what they're for? Ask them. All the heads of the tax committees are for revenue-neutral tax reform. You know what that means? That means half of you will pay more, half of you will pay less, and the net effect on the economy is zero. I tell people, if that's what we're for, I'm going home. I got better things to do than shift the tax burden. Now, they say they want to make it simpler, but listen to what like Jeb is saying, and what's the guy with the hat is saying. You know, they're saying they want to increase the taxes on carried interest because it would be more fair because people pay individual taxes of 39% and some people are only paying 15%. You know what I want to do? Instead of bringing 15 to 39, let's take those at 39 and take them to 15. I would scrap the whole tax code, all 70,000 pages of it, the IRS, and have your taxes on one postcard. You'd be able to fill out your return on one postcard. 14.5% for business, 14.5% for individuals. And then let's own it. What does that mean? It means that we believe jobs are created by the private sector, not the public sector. That we want to send less money to Washington and keep more money in Michigan. I think we can be boldly for what we are for and get new voters. Now, there are some things that I think we should do as well. You've seen that I'll stand up for privacy in the Fourth Amendment and that the government shouldn't be looking at your credit card statements or your phone records. That attracts independence. If you look at my numbers in any of the states that are difficult to win, I'm getting more independent vote than anyone. Why? Because of issues like that. Because I believe in a reasonable foreign policy that doesn't always get us involved, that believes war is the last resort and that war should be declared by Congress. But I want to leave you with one last story. And this is a story about the Sixth Amendment. I spend a lot of my time saying we need to be the party of the entire Bill of Rights. The Sixth Amendment says that you have the right to a trial by jury. It also says you have a right to a speedy trial. We don't talk about it much because people are like, well, certainly we have that in our country, right? Certainly we're preserving that. Khalif Browder was a 16-year-old black kid in the Bronx. He was accused of a crime, never convicted, and never taken to court. He was accused of a crime by someone who actually wasn't even in the country legally. He spent 3 years in Rikers Island, 16-year-old kid. He spent 2 years in solitary confinement. He was beaten, and who else knows what happened to him. He tried to commit suicide in prison multiple times, and then unfortunately has been out about a year and did commit suicide and died about a month or two ago. Poor black kid in the Bronx. It's hard for us to understand that. If it was our kid, we've got the money to get him out. We're going to get a good lawyer and get him out. It's not that we're overtly saying, oh, let's do this, but it's happening in our country. Criminal justice isn't being applied. And you say, what are you doing? You saying it's racist that we're just arresting black people? No, but what happens is, because we have all these laws and crime tends to be committed in the cities in close proximity, there's more poor people and there's more African Americans in the city. And so if you add all this up, marijuana arrest in Chicago, 15 black kids for every white kid. Why? Surveys say the white kids are smoking pot too. They're just out in the suburbs somewhere and the police don't show up. It isn't done on purpose, but day in, day out, it adds up. 3 out of 4 people in prison are black or brown. What I say is the right to a trial, the right to a lawyer, the right to a speedy trial. You know what? If we became the party that had compassion for some of these people that I think are mistreated by the criminal justice system, if we became the party that was proclaiming passionately that we will defend justice whether you're white, black, rich, or poor, if we became the party that defended the Sixth Amendment with the same sort of strength of character that we defend the Second Amendment, we're going to be a party that's so big, we're going to rock and roll to victory. That's what I want to be part of, and I hope you do too. Thank you.